I know that we said we were going to take Juneteenth off, right? But here's your resident black person working. Welcome to the Good Word, y'all. Vincent Goodwill here on the Ball Don't Lie Network on Yahoo Sports. Get us wherever you are getting your podcast. Happy Juneteenth for all of you all who commemorated, I guess, and for the companies who perhaps allow their employees to take the day off. Not us here at Yahoo Sports, though, because we got trades, or we got a big trade that's not quite yet finished, and it's just going to be me today. Me and John Gennaro behind the glass. I'm going to call on him so he can talk about the resident Wizard fans in his life to tell us exactly their state of mind. Bradley Beal, winner of the financial sweepstakes because he has a 15% trade kicker on top of the $200 million contract or extension that he signed with the Wizards, on top of the no trade clause, which meant that he got to determine where he wanted to go. And it was not the Miami Heat. It was not the Milwaukee Bucks. It was the Phoenix Suns. So for those of you who have been under a rock, it is Bradley Beal so far. Bradley Beal going to Phoenix for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, a handful of seconds, and multiple pick swaps. Be careful about the pick swaps because the Washington Wizards are going into full rebuild mode. I'm not sure exactly why they would want to swap first-round picks with the Phoenix Suns, but we can leave that on the shelf because it is the second biggest move for the Phoenix Suns in the last 4 months, because the first one was acquiring Kevin Durant, with new owner Matt Ishbia stepping into his role on his very first day. You know, like Craig got fired on his day off. Matt Ishbia made sure that he brought on almost $1 billion worth of salary pretty much from the time that he took over. The man wants to win. Now bringing on Bradley Beal, adding him to Devin Booker, adding him to Kevin Durant. I'm not sure about the fit, but I understand the motive behind making the deal, especially when you consider the timing. The timing of it is right before the NBA draft. The timing of it is also before the new CBA starts to filter itself in with the rules on the second luxury tax apron, which the Phoenix Suns would definitely be a second apron team. It's a lot of minutia that goes into that, but just consider this. They were going to have to be players in the minimum market anyway. Once they decided that Chris Paul and his $30 million contract was not going to be brought back this season, because obviously Chris Paul slowing down, he's aging. We saw he's not necessarily as reliable in the postseason with the games that he missed in that second round series against the Denver Nuggets. Mind you, they gave the Denver Nuggets the best run of the postseason. They got two games off of the Denver Nuggets. Everybody else got 2 games total off the Denver Nuggets. And I wonder if that is a catalyst for how Matt Ishbia, Josh Bartelstein, James Jones, and don't forget new coach Frank Vogel decided they wanted to go about making this move for Bradley Beal. Is it too much positional duplication when you consider Brad and Devin Booker are your traditional shooting guards? They aren't really combo guards. They aren't lead guards. They are shooting guards. We remember the point book era before Chris Paul got to Phoenix when Devin Booker was thrust into the point guard position. He might have to wind up doing a lot more facilitating, right? Who's going to make the game easier for one of these 3 guys? Kevin Durant is now at the stage of his career where someone should be trying to make the game easier for him. Maybe he's not the best player in the game anymore. We can certainly say that Nikola Jokic has taken that crown and snatched it away from whoever had it. And you got Giannis and you got Joel Embiid if he ever decides to play in May. And you got Stephen Curry sort of following right behind it. Kevin Durant is in that next tier. But he also needs someone, especially at his age and with his injury history, to have someone be able to make the game easier for him. Is that going to be Devin Booker? Is Devin Booker going to wind up playing a lot more point guard while Bradley Beal can play off the ball a little bit more? Both players are good pick and roll players to get into the basketball element of it. Both players are really good pick and roll players. Bradley Beal is probably a better spot up shooter off the catch. which is probably an impetus for this move being made. And I can see it in that way. But that's if he's healthy. Because you're talking about a guy who's only played 90 games in the last 2 seasons. And Bradley Beal is in an interesting place because the first thing that you think about or that you talk about when mentioning Bradley Beal is how much money he's going to make, which is perfectly reasonable because the money you make basically affects how you are able to build your team. But on the floor, Bradley Beal has never been in the spot where he could afford to be a team's third best player. This form of Bradley Beal, the Bradley Beal that's become an all-star since he and John Wall were able to form that backcourt with the Wizards years ago, and both players were at the peak of their powers, he was still kind of second fiddle to John Wall. Now, he's the third best player to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And if you take the money out of it, and you look at the way that teams will have to defend the Phoenix Suns, he's going to feast. He is absolutely going to feast. But here's the other part of this, guys, that the Phoenix Suns actually need another big-time scorer when you already have arguably the greatest scorer in the history of the game in terms of skill set and potency in Kevin Durant, and someone who's a certified bucket getter who can give you 50 on a given night in Devin Booker. I'm very, very, very curious about the fit for the Phoenix Suns. Don't be surprised, especially because the only players they have under contract for sure are those 3 guys and DeAndre Ayton. I would expect they wound up picking up an option for Cameron Payne, but they're going to be doing some bargain basement shopping. They're going to be searching for the open box specials, because they are going to be a second apron team. By my calculations, and it is certainly crack calculations, because of the 15% trade kicker that Bradley Beal has. $53 million for Bradley Beal, right? That is a huge, huge number. And altogether, with Beal's 53 and Book's 36 and KD's 48 and DeAndre Ayton's $32 million off of the matched offer sheet from the Indiana Pacers this past offseason, that's $169 million in salary. So let's just round up and say that it's 170, puts them well over the cap, well over the first apron. Now you're into the second apron, assuming Ayton is there. And I'm not sure he is there because he's a guy who you had to worry about losing. You lost him the year before against Dallas in the second round, him, Monty Williams. You lost him again this year. I don't even know if you ever actually got him back. They wound up just figuring some things out, but we got to see DeAndre Ayton be a little bit more exposed in the playoffs, and him being a young player that wants to find his way, that's a really talented guy, mind you, that really wants to touch the ball, that really wants to find his offense. He's not going to be able to have those touches. He's going to be relegated to getting it off the glass and screening and rebounding. Does he want to do that? If he doesn't want to do that, that means that you have to figure out a way to find a home for him, and maybe you break DeAndre Ayton up or that money up into smaller corresponding pieces. Maybe you wind up just going to get a rebounding big man for a fraction of the price, and maybe you get a wing defender. Perhaps, can you get that in one team? Can you get that in one trade? I'm not exactly sure, but I do think that DeAndre Ayton is something that Matt Ishbia and Josh Bartelstein and James Jones, they have to go and revisit going into that, because if he's not going to be happy, you have to figure out a way to make something of this, because this is a very small and finite window for the Phoenix Suns with Kevin Durant's age and Booker's age. And now Booker's age isn't fine. He's actually still in the young age. He's still very, very young. I think he's like 27. And now you have Bradley Beal, who, of course, is a couple of years removed from leading the league in scoring, averaging 30 a game when he played with Russell Westbrook. But once again, 90 games over the last 2 years. And he's had injury problems from the moment that he stepped into the league. Nothing of the Achilles ACL variety, but just nicks and bruises. Nicks and bruises that makes him unreliable when you just trade a player, and Chris Paul, who we could all say was a little on the unreliable side, or a lot on the unreliable side. So this is a very ambitious, a very small window for the Phoenix Suns, and Frank Vogel, man, he's got a lot of work to do. Frank Vogel and James Jones got a lot of work to do here, right? a lot of work to do. And when you got those three offensive-minded players, and Kevin Durant at one point was one of the league's defenders, best defenders at the rim. He could defend at all three levels. He could use his length. But now you're at the stage where you want to have to save him. You don't want to have to overexert him because he's going to miss games as a function of all the lower leg injuries that he's had, and you want to be able to keep him fresh. And he only played 8 games for the Suns last year after being acquired after the deadline because he slipped and hurt his ankle during warm-ups of his Phoenix Suns home opener. So you have to be very cognizant of that. But again, 3 offensive-minded players. You have so many roster spots open, and you're going to have to go and get some really rough and defensive-minded players with the limited resources that you're going to have on the veterans minimum, assuming that you wind up keeping DeAndre Ayton. I think they should wind up exploring other options, but let's see what happens. Don't be surprised if they wind up going to get, and I'm going to bring in John Gennaro on this because I'm very curious. John is going to serve as proxy for you guys when I bring up this name. So John, very curious what you think of the name DeMarcus Cousins coming and serving as a backup big man for the Phoenix Suns. Boogie's been out of the league for a couple years. I forgot where I know he's playing overseas. He had been trying to get back in. Remember, he had that stint with the Lakers. What do you think of Boogie Cousins, who would now be around year 12, 13 next year, came into the league in 2010. So I should be year 14 as a pro. What do you think of Boogie Cousins?
Personally, I like Boogie. I don't know that he fits here because, and I'm going to ignore the fact that like he hasn't really been in the league for a couple years and people will probably get on him for that. You just said that what the Suns need to build around these 3 guys is a team of defensive-minded players on veteran minimum contracts. Like Boogie might sign for a veteran minimum contract. Is he a defensive-minded player? Like I've always viewed Boogie as a offensive-minded player who's kind of big and therefore can not, really hurt you on defense. But I don't think he's necessarily a great fit for this team. But I guess what you're saying is if they traded Ayton, they're going to get pretty desperate as far as big men go, right?
They're going to be pretty desperate, period, John. Okay? Like, look, you would probably want to bring back Torrey Craig, but I'm not sure if you would be able to have the resources for him. Josh Okogie is a lot younger, making less than $2 million a year. You should be able to bring him back. He's 24. You're probably looking at him and saying he's an integral part of what you would want to do, especially as someone with wing defender potential. That's something, right? But they've got a lot. They've got a lot going on in Phoenix, and I won't say I'm surprised, but I think this thing signals, this has a bunch of different tentacles that's more symbolic than anything else, because you've got the Chris Paul element, and we can get into that. We got the Damian Lillard element, and we can get into that. But it's just really indicative of what this new CBA looks like and how teams who are up against that second apron, they are looking at it and saying, whatever moves we have to make, let's go ahead and make them now. Let's go ahead and make them A, before the draft, and B, before free agency. And there's only a few days between the draft and free agency. The draft will be on Thursday in New York, and free agency will be about 3 or 4 days after that. So I would not be surprised if there is a flurry of activity. So let's get to some more of the brass tacks. A, the trade is not completely finalized, because Chris Paul can wind up being rerouted somewhere else. You can be sure that he will not play a game in Washington, D.C. Like, there is no use for Chris Paul at his age. This is not the Chris Paul, even the 4 years ago, that played with the Oklahoma City Thunder and was able to play with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and help that team stabilize itself after all the losses that they had in the Russell Westbrook trade. Remember that Russell Westbrook-Chris Paul trade? That was about 4 trades away for both of those guys. Like, the world has completely turned in the NBA since 2019 when both of those guys, will move for each other. But if you're Chris Paul, you get the Lakers as an option, of course, the Clippers as an option. He lives in LA. I'm sure he would love to be right back there. He played all those years with the Clippers. They never got over the top, in large part because Chris Paul, in his younger super prime days, couldn't stay healthy. And now you have the Lakers as a potential option. Everybody remembers the basketball reasons trade back in 2011 when Adam Silver, when the late commissioner, Emperor David Stern, said, no, we're not doing that. When he was operating as owner, essentially, for the New Orleans franchise before the Anthony Davis arrival, before the Anthony Davis departure. So now you've got LeBron potentially maybe wanting Chris Paul, but LeBron has his eyes on Kyrie Irving. And while both of those guys are unreliable for different reasons, Kyrie Irving is a bit younger. And Kyrie Irving may be a better player, all told, than Chris Paul. Chris Paul is an excellent floor general. I wonder, with his age and the drop-off that his game has suffered over the past couple of years, considering he's 38 and there's no archetype for a 38-year-old point guard at his size. Like Jason Kidd was a bigger point guard. Magic Johnson had already been retired twice by then. Isaiah Thomas had been retired by then. John Stockton feels like the only archetype for the Chris Paul type of point guard, but John Stockton was rarely hurt, which is why John Stockton was able to play 80-plus games late in his career where he managed his minutes, but then again, he wasn't playing on a championship team with the Utah Jazz towards the later years. This is going to be a much different situation for Chris Paul. You wonder if he's going to be on the Kyle Lowry phase of his career where, maybe he comes off the bench and he's the floor general and he's someone that can keep things in order. Can he and Russell Westbrook play together? Or would it be a choice of one or the other if you're the Clippers and you want Chris Paul and you want to pair him with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George? And I tell you this, if you do pair him with those two guys, they better beef up that medical staff because that training table is going to be full every damn day, okay? There's just too much going on there. The Clippers, of course, the question always is if we get healthy, if we can figure things out, if we can put things together. And we saw last year they did everything they could to keep Kawhi Leonard upright, and Paul George wound up getting hurt on a freaky fall, with a few weeks left in the regular season. And although they gave the Phoenix Suns a good enough run in the first round of the playoffs and stole game one, they were no match for them. You didn't have the stars. And now you're going to add another potentially older player, according to our former colleague here at Yahoo Sports, Chris Haynes, who's pretty well plugged in with Chris Paul, of course, said the Clippers are indeed a destination. So perhaps that's why this trade has not yet been finalized. There's some other pieces that could be added to it, more money moved around, more draft picks, but I would expect this to be finalized over the next couple of days. I would expect this certainly to be finalized before we get into the heaviness of the NBA draft, the heaviness of the Wemby draft on Thursday night in New York City. So it is a lot going on there. I don't know where Chris Paul fits long term, but I do think that the Phoenix Suns recognize that they had gotten everything they could out of Chris Paul. And Chris Paul was the catalyst for the Phoenix Suns being a respected basketball product. And I think that's something that has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle because of how Chris Paul has, struggled in the playoffs the past couple of years. But before he got there, Phoenix was a way station. And Devin Booker had been wandering in the wilderness by himself. And although he told me in 2018 with a quote that's going around on Twitter, I want the super team to come to me. I don't want to I want to build my own super team. It was Chris Paul that was the first domino. And there's a lot of respect that you have to give Chris Paul and coming there and then embracing that. He and Monty Williams, who was fired and now rehired in Detroit for a record contract to coach. Now Chris Paul is going to be sent somewhere else, but those two were main catalysts in the Phoenix Suns turning themselves into a viable destination, which opened the door for a guy like Bradley Beal to come there. And once again, I'm going to impress this upon everybody. Bradley Beal's a really good basketball player. Like, playing for the Washington Wizards seems to have put a stink on him because the Wizards have never done anything He's only played 90 games over the past couple of years. The Wizards have never won 50 games as long as I've been alive. They haven't won 50 games since Off the Wall came out. And it probably was even before Off the Wall came out. So the Wizards have never been known as a viable franchise. But I do think that, for the Wizards and the Wizards fans in your life, they're probably breathing a sigh of relief. Because a real rebuild can start. Tommy Shepard out, Michael Winger in, and they got Will Dawkins and Travis Schlenk in that front office, and they are going to a full-scale rebuild. I wonder what happens with Kyle Kuzma, who's a free agent, Kristaps Porzingis with his $35 million. You wonder if the Phoenix Suns have basically set the price, or at least the strategy, for those higher apron teams who literally will have very limited resources. If you're going to go through it and go do it and do it now before the clock strikes midnight on June 30th and you lose your resources. And the CBA was designed to keep the big spenders from spending more and using all the mechanisms. They can't use the traded player exceptions. They can't go and get players from the buyout market. Like, they are really limiting the outside resources for teams that have spent a lot of money to get better. So the way to combat that, especially in the next 4 or 5 days, is if you're going to make a big move, you better go and do it now. You better do it now, and you better take the pain. And I think that's what this signals for the Phoenix Suns, because clearly they're going for it. I don't think this makes them better than the Denver Nuggets. I don't even know if this pulls them closer to the Denver Nuggets. They've had scoring, they've had everything else, but as we've seen, the Western Conference is not particularly strong. Golden State sits where it sits with the questions that they have. Are you bringing back Jordan Poole? Are you bringing back Draymond Green? What's the number there? Mike Dunleavy Jr. with a lot of questions that he has to answer as he takes over in that front office. The Lakers, perpetual questions. What are you going to do when you have the future of LeBron James, in your hand? And we haven't heard much about that retirement lately, have we? But I digress. Okay? So there is so much to go on. I do think that this iteration is a little different than the Brooklyn Nets iteration with KD, James Harden, Kyrie Irving. This feels a little more emotionally stable, a little more adult, but I don't know if it means that they'll get even as close as those Brooklyn Nets did a couple of years ago when Kevin Durant was one toe away from putting out the Milwaukee Bucks and going on to the Eastern Conference Finals, or probably going to the finals, where Kevin Durant probably would have played the Phoenix Suns in 2021. It's just a matter of sometimes how these things work. But man, John, I'm gonna ask you before we go, because the Washington Wizards are probably one of those teams that feel like they never get talked about because they're a perpetual, laughing stock of mediocrity. Because John, I don't have any Wizards fans in my life. I have one Wizard fan in my life, and he hasn't texted me, and I'm sure that he hasn't texted me for a reason. But John, for the Wizards fans in your life, what's their reaction to all this?
They're thrilled, man. Like they after so many years of being told, like, we have a chance. After a while, you start realizing we don't have a chance for anything. They don't have a chance for anything, staying where they were. And I think there comes a time, as a person who has rooted for many bad teams, there comes a time where you're just rooting for your star player to have like a happy ending, even if it's not with you. So they all seem happy for Bradley and happy that the Wizards seem to be going in a different direction than promising their fans we have a chance when they actually don't.
Yeah, it is funny that you say happy endings. Because, the Wizards fans have never even dreamt about a happy ending. They've wanted to just get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they've gotten close a couple of times to get there. But even the years that they were close, remember the Paul Pierce I called game year, and there was another year where John Wall broke his hand against the Atlanta Hawks, and then there was another year against the Boston Celtics where, remember John Wall standing on the table, the scorer's table at Capital One Center, Verizon Center, whatever the hell it's called. These are interchanging their names every year. But they were never really looked at as a viable championship contender. They had some good runs, but they were, of course, the Washington Wizards. And when you speak of happy endings, that's where we transition very quickly before we go to Damian Lillard. And it looks like whatever Portland does with that number 3 pick, whether it's offering Anthony Simons up to whomever wants that number 3 pick, Simons in the number 3 for a real star, could be the linchpin for whether Damian Lillard decides, hey, I want to stay here, I want to keep this, keep pushing this thing through, or get me out of here. And if that's why the Miami Heat sort of backed off their pursuit of Bradley Beal, considering the very low cost for Bradley Beal being, Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and the rest of the items from Fred and Lamont Sanford's garage, you wonder if the Miami Heat know a little bit something that we don't know. And that will come to bear out possibly over the next few days. But that is just the precursor. That is just the first domino to fall. No matter how you think of Bradley Beal, it is the first domino to fall in this NBA offseason where I anticipate every team worth a damn will be going for it. And that means we will be right here waiting for you. Hopefully it won't be on a holiday next time. But for John Gennaro behind the glass, the voice that you guys heard, you got to hear John for maybe, I believe might have been the first time on this podcast because I was flying solo. John, thank you. Don't forget, Evan and Ron always putting together the videos that you guys see on YouTube and on social media and on Twitter. They always do a great job. I'm sure they're going to be working today. So make sure you part a little liquor for them or have a cigar for them. But I'm your host, Vincent Goodwill. Never forget to rate us and review us. We're on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all those different platforms. Remember, this week, Kristen Peak will be back with another episode of On the Clock on Wednesday, another draft preview laden show with KP. She is excellent at this. And then Jake and Dan will be back with a new episode of No Cap Room on Friday morning after the draft with a full draft review, and we'll be headed to free agency and headed to July Summer League in 2 weeks. The NBA offseason is in full effect right after we just saw Nikola Jokic get drunk twice or 3 times out in public and then head back to Serbia to hang with his horses. I wish I was hanging somewhere with some horses. I actually don't, because that ain't really my get down. But y'all, everybody, enjoy your Juneteenth. See you guys in a few days. Everybody be safe.